Good afternoon. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all our viewers joining in the inaugural Future Careers in Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics or STEM panel discussion, hosted by the Griffith Sciences Partnership Office. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet on, and I acknowledge wherever it is we meet from around Australia that these are Aboriginal lands. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. My name is Professor Robert Sang, and I'm a Professor of Experimental Atomic Physics and the Dean Academic for the Sciences Group at Griffith University. Today, I'll be facilitating our panel discussion. The Sciences Group has three schools: the School of Engineering Built Environment, the School of Environment and Science, and the School of Information and Communication Technology. We also have over 10 research institutes and centres covering a broad range of research such as quantum physics, artificial intelligence, space, industrial applications, to water catchment science, but to just name a few. The world that we live in faces a number of grand challenges, such as climate change, water security, energy resources, population growth, and globalisation, to name a few. It's pretty clear that STEM has a major role to play in finding solutions. We're also seeing a rapid and disruptive change to the workforce through technological development, automation, and of course the current health pandemic means that STEM will influence how we do things. What will STEM jobs look like in the future? And which professions are most likely to be in demand? What skills will be needed to succeed in this emerging environment? And what opportunities do these challenges present for STEM graduates entering the workforce? Joining me today on our panel are four leaders in their respective fields who will share their insights and ideas about how we navigate these challenges. Let me introduce our panellists. Professor Hugh Possingham is the Queensland Chief Scientist for the Queensland Government. Professor Possingham has extensive expertise in mathematics and ecology and has a notable career dedicated to improving conservation science and techniques through mathematical modelling of ecologies. Welcome, Hugh.
Hi.
Dr. Yuxi Leitner is a co-founder of Lyro Robotics. Dr. Leitner is a world-leading expert in robotic grasping with over a decade of research experience in robotics, computer vision, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Welcome, Yuxi. Okay, I think we have Joanne is here as well. Has Joanne joined us? Is that correct? No, I apologize. Ms. Megan Capilleri is the Manager of Enterprise Information Management Practice at Datacom and a member of the Griffith University School of Information Communication Technology Industry Advisory Board. Megan is a practice information management professional with 2 decades of experience across the government and private and utility sectors. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you.
And we do have, well, we haven't joined us at the moment. There's some technical issues at Joanne Manning, and we're hopeful that Joanne will be able to join us. But Joanne Manning is the Resource and Waste Management Lead for Australasia at Arup. Joanne is a Chartered Engineer and Fellow of Engineers Ireland with a Certified Practicing Project Director within the Australian Institute of Project Management and Regional Skills Leader for the Resource and Waste Management. She's highly skilled in the field of waste management with over 20 years of industry experience in Europe and Australasia. And as I mentioned, Joanne is actually just having some technical issues, so she may or may not be able to join us. So hopefully we'll be able to join us, and we'll get some perspectives from her towards the end of the panel discussion, if that is possible. Before we start, I just want to also showcase, I'm really excited to showcase this inaugural event for the Griffith Sciences Partnership Office. The Griffith Sciences Partnership Office was established in 2019 as a front door for external partners for the Griffith Sciences Group and to coordinate a broad range of engagement activities between our staff, students and industry partners. Griffith Sciences partnerships involve global industry, local business, all levels of government and community as a part of a strategy to nurture and grow meaningful collaborations between industry and Griffith University to enhance the learning experience and employability of our graduates. Of course, we invite you to partner with us through student internships, research collaborations, and much more. Information on how you can actually do that will be provided at the end of this session. Now, just for a couple of formalities, I'd just like to let you know that this session is actually being recorded, and for those that have registered, an email link will be sent of that recording so that you can actually view that. If you're watching this live, we encourage you to submit any questions you have in the Q&A chat through the session, and we'll do our best towards the end of the panel discussion and give our panelists a chance to answer those questions. Okay, so firstly, I'll start with Professor Hugh Possingham. Welcome to the position of Chief Scientist, and how's the first few weeks been?
Thanks, Robert. Interesting. The job is extremely diverse. So my task as the Queensland Chief Scientist, and I wouldn't be surprised if 95% of the people listening didn't even know we had a Chief Scientist. But my job in the state government is to help the ministers, the Director Generals, all the public servants and the whole state of Queensland on every aspect of science, which sort of sounds impossible. Well, I mean, I'm meant to be across everything, including from water science to nuclear science. I probably need you there, Robert, Great Barrier Reef, synthetic biology, the lot. And indeed, I think, as most people on this panel know now, as scientists, we're meant to know about so the social sciences as well, more quantitative sciences, Indigenous knowledge. So in that sense, it's very diverse. And I suppose that diversity is probably indicative of what a modern scientist has to do. You sort of need to be very good at one or two things, but then you need to be able to know a lot of things about other stuff. Other than assisting them on connecting the government with industry and promoting scientific industries in the state and attending to tricky scientific problems that the state's having to deal with, whether that be dingoes on Fraser Island or nuclear power. One of the things I particularly enjoy about the job, and I haven't done much of it yet in this world that's a bit more challenging, is promoting science to young Queenslanders, and also trying to diversify science, encouraging those groups that are not well represented in the sciences to engage with science and learn a lot more science and see a career in science.
Thanks very much for that, Hugh. It's such an important job, and it's great to have I think for me to know that we have a person of your scientific calibre in there, and I guess fighting for science and STEM. I'll just start with a couple of questions. So do you believe that we will see a skill shortage in STEM graduates and professionals as a result of rapid technological developments made to address some of these immediate issues?
Yes, definitely. I think the world in my area, and maybe I'll speak even more from my experience in the last 4 years working for a big NGO. So I was the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy. It operates in 80 countries and it sounds like a conservation NGO. But what were we short of? Now, we weren't short of ornithologists. We weren't short of ecologists, really. We were short of quantitative analysts, people who could deal with spatial data, people who had a mixed background from economics to finance as well as science. So I suppose the people, even in a field like conservation, which one might imagine does, you know, in the past, 20 years ago, didn't involve a lot of modelling and big data and data analysis. That's what we want. We were exploring drones and using drones to, how do you monitor forests in Borneo, in the heart of Borneo, without causing damage? Well, it's going to be acoustic monitoring, it's going to be camera traps, it's going to be deploying those machines with drones. There's a lot of engineering in that space. And then there's huge amounts of data. We're actually drowning in data in some places. And how do you interpret and analyse all that data? So, you know, I think we are short of people with those quantitative skills, particularly when they're allied to specific areas. They can be statistical skills, as I say, spatial analysis skills. An interesting group of skills that we were always short of was evaluation skills. What does evaluation mean? People talked about that to me a lot and I was never quite sure what they meant by evaluation. It's basically, how do you know whether anything you've done works? You know, if the government intervenes and sets up new policies and granting schemes and frameworks, that we've just handed out some money for citizen science, how do we actually evaluate that using a mix of qualitative and quantitative data? So a much underrated skill is those evaluation skills, which are data skills.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Hugh. Another question I'd like to ask is, how could industries and universities better engage and collaborate in order to kickstart research and development opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I again, from my experience, I suppose, before joining the Nature Conservancy, most of our work we did with industry, and the industry was, in our case, government and environmental NGOs, and in some cases, industries like the mining industry. So I've just very simply found that those people who did honours projects, postdocs and PhDs with me, and there were 200 of those people who did that over a 30-year period as an academic, they all quickly got jobs, and most of them got jobs with the industry that co-sponsored their PhD honours or postdoctoral project. So co-funding is the key. People tend to employ people they know and have started to think about the problems that they're interested in, whether it be a mining company or an environmental NGO or government. And it's that relationship building that happens while you're doing research projects, small or large, and they can even be as an undergraduate. That relationships, you start to understand how those companies work, you start to understand how government works, you can start to speak the same language, and then when they start to recruit in your space, you have a natural advantage. So I would like to see more people joint appointed between universities and other sectors. I would like to see more people going backwards and forwards between the university sector and other sectors. That, you know, in the past there were a bit of walls around the ivory towers, and you went in and you were never seen again until you were retired and taking your superannuation, other than the occasional yelling on in the ABC News. So you know, I think the doors of the universities are much more fluid and much more open, and I would like to make it easier for academics to move backwards and forwards between all the different sectors, because that's when the education and the projects become much more real. Thanks very much, Hugh. And look, and I have to agree with you. I think universities are a great intellectual resource and with great capacity in there as well. And I think there has been problems in the past where people in universities perhaps are not thinking about problems that are useful perhaps to industry, and perhaps industry thinking that university researchers are just in there, as you said, their ivory towers and not really researching problems that are useful to them. Thanks very much for that, Hugh. Megan, I'd like to turn to you now. How will recent change in working conditions impact future professions in STEM?
Thanks, Robert. And I think that's a really interesting question, and one that most organisations, and I can speak to the ICT industry, have been talking about quite extensively. With regards to working conditions, I'm sort of seeing two common themes of the impact so far. And the first is towards ICT professionals themselves and the additional skills that individuals require. And the other's around the shift in how ICT services are being delivered and consumed. I think with regards to ICT professionals, it's really making sure now that individuals are equipped with the skills required to work in a world that will now forever be different. I know in my organisation, we're already considering in our new hires a heightened focus on soft skills such as agility, communication skills, leadership, innovation and creative thinking, adaptability to change, and most importantly, the ability now to work in virtual teams that are under significant pressure to deliver. And I think that ICT professionals need to be more well-rounded and developed in these soft skills than ever before, in addition to the technical skills that we would traditionally hire with. I guess to touch on the delivery and consumption of ICT services, we've certainly seen that most customers are looking to implement projects or consume services at a faster pace than normal in recent times. So staff are working remotely under increased demand, and they need to work collaboratively in virtual teams, but they're also working virtually with their customers. So it's created this new dynamic about the way that we do things. And even though that's sort of become the new normal, it's transformational to the industry, and it's now become the embedded way of working. So I guess the notion of working face to face has certainly decreased, and the need to be proactive in the way that we deliver services or projects seems to be what I would identify as a keystone to ongoing success.
Thanks for that, Megan. Yes, and I think it's also interesting the concept of what is the new normal in these sort of conditions as we evolve through this pandemic. Will we see unconventional positions created in order to meet the needs of the increased digital economy?
I think the short answer to that is yes, that we will. But what they are exactly, I'm not even entirely sure of yet. I think that what we've seen so far is a huge pivot in the services that our customers want to consume, and therefore an increased demand in roles such as automation, working with bots, artificial intelligence, data and analytics, cybersecurity. And I guess these trends follow on from our customers wanting faster paced delivery of services, but they're also looking for those services now to be delivered with a heightened assurance of security and resilience due to the world that we now work in. So there's certainly a focus around all of that. And I guess this can only lead itself to the creation of unconventional roles, as you suggest. And I, for one, very much look forward to seeing what emerges in this space over the next few months, because I sense that we'll see that change quite soon.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. How have you seen the IT industry change, and what do you think will be the biggest change to the industry coming out of COVID?
I think one of the biggest things that I would say has changed is there's an immense focus on digital trust. Organisations are having to trust the systems and processes that they have in place more than ever, and it's also created a hive of activity around things like process automation. So normal day-to-day business operations such as contract approvals or HR onboarding or offboarding and things that typically happen in an organisation on a day-to-day basis aren't happening face-to-face anymore. So organisations are having to spin up all of these support services and automate them. I guess the other one is like the people and the skill sets that I've sort of already alluded to today, but one of the really big changes that I'm seeing is organisations are really starting to reconsider where their ICT spend goes. So they're rethinking their ICT strategies, and there's definitely been a shift, or I guess a move towards organisations that have traditionally potentially offshored their ICT services and now looking to onshore them to have greater assurance around what's happening due to, I guess, the chaos in the world. And I guess that's great news for the Australian ICT market. I guess also from my perspective as a consultant that works in the industry is that organisations in their shift to strategy are realigning and shortening their strategy timeframes. So they're looking to sort of, organisations would typically look at a 3 to 5 year strategy. They're now reducing that to a 12-month to 2-year strategy so that they can be more agile in what they want to do. And I think it'll be very interesting as we've worked through those organisations to see how they pull their budgets and their ICT spends together for next year, because I think that this is where we'll have even greater insight and foresight of the changes that are coming.
Thanks very much for that, Megan. And I guess those transferable skills that you mentioned before about agility and the ability to be able to pivot to this sudden change is so important for as a skill set for an individual to actually have in this climate.
Absolutely.
Thanks. I'll move over now to Yuxi. What newly emerged technologies will drive the biggest change in the industry over the next 5 to 10 years, and how will these impact future careers in this space?
Yeah, that's definitely a very good question. So as co-founder of a robotics company, I definitely have to say robotics and AI is one of the main changes that is coming out of, and has specifically in the last couple of months really accelerated, right? So a lot of industries are seeing labor shortages and issues with the supply chain and how to have a secure and reliable supply chain. And it was mentioned before, I think Megan mentioned the data that's out there, how to deal with the data that's out there, how to make informed decision out of that data and make automated decision out of that data is clearly going to be a very big influence in a lot of different industries. So from our point of view as a company, we're looking at from agriculture all the way to e-commerce, where our robotic applications are having actually an impact right now, and that will just grow over the next time. How will this impact the future careers? As I said, like the careers over multiple industries will be impacted by that. And I think for me, one of the critical aspects there is like a STEM education, or an education that actually allows you to reason about this and evaluate, as was mentioned also earlier, what tools to use is critical, right? So there's very limited point in trying to learn everything right now about AI, because it's such a fast moving field that in a couple of months, everything will have to change. The only thing that is sort of constant is there to understand which is the right tool for the right job to get out there. So I think that is one of the critical aspects that will change. And I think especially the push for STEM and the thinking about scientific methods and evaluation that was mentioned before is very critical to get the graduates out there that have upskilled and actually can perform these decision-making processes that either machines or AI are actually doing underneath.
Thanks for that. Many tech companies are expanding the use of AI as a result of the current economic climate. How can individuals prepare themselves for a future career potentially working alongside AI and machine learning?
Yeah, very good question again. I think while there's an expanding use of AI, and I think it's mainly just accelerated, right? It's not something that just happened. I guess it's one of those, a decade in the making for an overnight success stories in the AI industry, right? So the AI and machine learning has been around for a while, but we've definitely seen an accelerated uptake in the industries and by companies to use these technologies. And the current economic climate definitely has to do with that, right? But it will stick around, right? So I think a lot of the AI technologies that are out there, most people currently don't really understand that they're using them, like from your email spam filter, which uses machine learning, all the way to optimization of climate models for weather forecast. So they might sort of sneak under, but I personally see that in the next couple of years and decades, we'll see AI teams emerging in companies, kind of like you have an IT system at this time, or an IT team that handles this. For people to get out there, I think one of the things that you should be trying to find out is what is really the interesting thing for you, and really spend time on doing it. Learn about it, go out there. There's a lot of resources for AI and machine learning out there, and really learn about what the capabilities are. Because I think the critical aspect is to work alongside and work with these technologies, just to understand where they are actually working and where they are not working. Because again, like any other tool, any software that you install on your computer these days, you need to understand what you can actually do with it. And the same thing with AI and machine learning. Your image classification, which is obviously one of the tasks that AI has really succeeded over the last 5 years, maybe a decade, and really sort of become almost superhuman in performance. It doesn't work everywhere, right? And it's really important to understand what is the right tool for the right job, especially when you have to continuously evaluate what tool to use and how to sort of improve that around you. And so I think for me, the most critical aspect is there is try to get out there and learn more about it, and learn that critical thinking about yes, I can use this, but what is actually the implications? And that's the implications. That's not just the engineering implication. Like if I put a system like this on a robotic system, what power requirements do I have for the graphics card, or what data requirements and throughput of the network do I have, but also what implication do I have on a broader system or societal scope? And I think that was mentioned before as well. Like, how do I have a measure of an implication that is more of a social aspect or more of a soft skill? I think is also clearly more and more becoming relevant alongside the scientific skills.
Thanks very much for that, Yuxi. And I guess a lot of people don't realise how much their everyday lives at the moment are actually using AI systems. So many people have smartphones, and they actually don't realise that how much that AI systems underpin the operations of those devices. So I'm just going to ask a quick follow-up from that, Yuxi, as well as,
sure.
Do people have to fear AI? I mean, I know you talk about it societally, but should we be fearful of it?
I personally believe we should not. It's like any other technology, right? There's certain aspects to it that can be used in positive implications and impact that have a positivity on society and the community. And there's certain aspects that certain parts of society might misuse. That's just the nature of technology. I don't think we should be fearful about it. What I think we need to be very careful with is to understand and teach people that sort of reasoning about technology, right? Like not every piece of technology can be used for every problem. And I think that is really sort of the critical thinking about it. And if it is used in the right application areas, I don't think we need to be fearful at all.
Thanks very much for that, Yuxi. It doesn't look like that Joanne is going to be able to join us, so I might move on to some more general questions to the panel. So feel free, whoever feels like they want to answer these questions. So I'll start with the first one. It's when considering Australia's current economic position, how will population growth and migration impact future opportunities for STEM professionals? And I guess in the context of Australia, it's not necessarily growth. I'm wondering, Hugh, if you would like to even have a crack at that one.
Yeah, I think Yuxi's already mentioned one, innovative agriculture. I mean, the world's population is growing. The agricultural revolution has to continue, and that will a lot be to do with technology and robotics. Waste management, we keep making more piles of waste. What do we do with it? Can we get anything useful out of it? But it's interesting to talk about population growth. In some senses, the world's population is actually, its rate of growth has just started to slow. So its rate of growth has been high for a long time. The most interesting demographic factor is the age structure. And I think we all know that people are getting, the fraction of people who are old and decrepit, like myself, are growing rapidly. And having just had both of my parents go through dementia in different ways, I think working out what people are going to do, and technology and science, this is not just medicine, but it's everything. The technology and science of making that last 5, but now maybe 10, 20 years of people's lives, better lives, more productive lives, that's fascinating, and that there will be no end of careers, and that is every kind of science you can imagine, from psychology to robotics, and that's a really important field. Important for me because I'm getting there, Robert. So, everybody's got to be making my life happier so I can still be bird watching and drinking wine when I'm 105, please.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Megan, I'm wondering if you have a perspective of this as well.
Look, I agree with everything really that Hugh said, and I really think that it's more, I guess, from my perspective, it's not so much around the population. It's now more than ever we're consuming data and we're consuming information and creating that at such a rapid pace that we need to think about how we manage all of that. We know more now than we've ever known before, and we're going to continue to know more and more the more that we adapt and grow and build these technologies and systems and processes that go around it. So I guess it's almost managing the knowledge that we're creating and being able to bring that together into sensible ways to do things. And I think that as we evolve and as the population, decreases or increases, whichever it may be, we're certainly living longer and we're certainly knowing more. So I think that we need to be able to think about ways that we can manage and consume the information that we've got. We're smarter than we've ever been.
Thanks, Megan. And Yuxi, what about your perspectives on this?
Yeah, no, I can only agree with the previous comments. I think there's a huge opportunity with the data that we have to make positive change and help us, with automated decision making from all the way to aged care that was mentioned. But also, maybe as an example, we as a robotics company, we are deploying robotic systems for fruit packing. There's just been a recent report that in the next 9 months, about 26,000 positions are going to get unfilled or not going to get filled because of limited migration, but also because people are not too interested in performing these tasks. But with the growth of population, people still want to eat. And Australia actually has an opportunity here for high quality produce, which Australia is pretty well known for. So for us, that is a starting step where we're actually deploying our robotic system, but it's also a starting step because these robotic systems are deployed in regional Queensland, for example, to upskill the people out there that actually need to maintain and ensure that the robotic system is performing up to scratch and performing all the tasks that are required. So I think it's a massive opportunity for Australia to become a technology exporter, more so than a technology importer that we are currently on.
Right. Thanks very much for that, Yuxi. I'll just remind the audience that if you would like the panelists to answer, if you have a question and you'd like the panelists to answer that, please feel free to pop that into the chat and I'll endeavour to ask our panelists that question. I just want to ask you all a question around emerging skills. So what do you think the key emerging skills that graduates and professionals will need to be equipped with? I already heard that Hugh talked about, for example, analytical skills. And then I think Megan spoke really about the transferable skills. Are there other skills, perhaps even technical skills? I know that, the average 6-year-old now is learning how to hack code in primary school, which is incredible to think about this, that's actually happening. And it's an incredible, I guess, workforce of the future. But I'm just wondering, are there other things that you believe that we might need or graduates might need to be thinking about? Who'd like to go first on that one?
I can go.
There we go. Okay, Yuxi, please.
I agree with the analytical and the transferable skills. I think that's critical. Maybe another aspect that I guess this may be a follow-up to your coding in elementary school and early ages. Coding is obviously a wonderful tool to learn, and it's allowing you to realize what is going on in a computer system. And there will definitely be more of that, and it's going to be helpful. But I think the other thing that is probably becoming increasingly important is to understand how complex systems interact and how complex systems work. It is a lot of systems out there these days, and or models of existing physical phenomena, for example, are not as straightforward as we sometimes believe they are. So knowing that the system is more complex and that a certain change of input does not require a certain expected outcome, I think is going to be also critical in that sort of more complex interaction. And for me, that involves also people and society as a complex system. How does it affect other people? How does it affect society as a whole? What impact can it have on that? Especially sort of from an engineering point of view, if you have AI systems out there that do make decisions, how does that impact people? I think that sort of complex interaction is something that is also a critical skill to have.
Yeah, I agree with Yuxi there. I think they have this term now, wicked problems, and wicked problems are problems, I suppose, that come up again a lot in conservation, where you have conflicts between different human values, different sectors of society that seem unresolvable, but also you have all these perverse and unpredictable outcomes. What does that mean? Government intervenes, well-meaning conservation groups intervenes, and suddenly they find that equity and power structures in Indigenous populations are turned upside down, and there's social collapse, and that's a disaster. That happened a lot in the 80s and 90s. Seemingly unpredictable human behaviour. So in some senses, it's interesting. Artificial intelligence is intriguing because a lot of it's modelled on human intelligence. But one thing, artificial intelligence really does the weird things that human beings do. And one of the things that human beings do a lot of is behave in incredibly perverse fashion. Possibly Australians are the masters of perversity, in the sense, as soon as they think they know what advertising agencies, industries, governments want them to do, they have a remarkable aptitude for saying, I don't like being told what to do. Yeah. And so this is the science of psychology. It's the science of the communication of information. We are in a world where people increasingly are not believing science, or they're challenging science, or they're saying, how can you manage the Great Barrier Reef? Don't you need a before-after control impact study? Well, you don't get before-after control impact studies with a reef that is the size of Italy, because we don't have 20 planets, and we can't explore policies in 10 of them and wait for 100 years and not explore them in the other 10 planets. That's a big Australian Research Council grant, building 20 planets. So the science that we're taught, that Popperian science that we get in first and second year science classes, which is observe things, do an intervention, have a control group, do some classical statistical analysis, and that is the bastion of truth. And you can see that's happening a lot, and people are saying, isn't that the only science? You know, where's your control? Where's your backy study? No, of course, if that was the only science, we wouldn't have no idea how to manage the Great Barrier Reef. It's just that science is only partially relevant. So how do you explain modelling to the general public and make sure that they have, it's not perfect, express uncertainty, point out that catastrophic events will happen, some management interventions won't work as well as you hope, but science is still a big, if you ignore the science, you'll do much worse, even though with the science you don't do perfectly. And that's a difficult conversation, and obviously in my job, that nexus between public opinion, policy and science is a tangled mess. So somebody, hopefully Megan, will help me.
And I think that that's a really good point, because I was sitting here and I'm thinking to myself as you were talking, you know, we've already spoken, I guess, about the transferable skills, but one thing that comes to mind, and it's a lovely segue, thanks Hugh, is the commercial element to the way that we deliver sciences. And we have to remember that people are making decisions on the technologies that we're implementing or the data that we're providing, and some of those decisions could have risk. It could be life-threatening stuff, and we need to make sure, I guess, as an additional skill set, that we're understanding what we're doing and we're understanding the risk impacts around all of that. So there's certainly consideration as a skill set, I guess, to make sure that you've got some commercial acumen in what you're doing, and being able to deliver, if you're a service provider especially, being able to deliver what you're doing with contained risk but a focused outcome, and bringing those elements of science and policy and governance and all of those things together, so that, you know, you're not killing people. For example, we work on organ match. So if we get that data wrong, people don't get an organ, their life doesn't get saved, you know. So there's big decisions that are being made around IT and science.
Absolutely. No, thanks very much for that, Megan and everyone. I guess the other question I want to ask is, you know, what professions will we see an increased demand for, whether it is around the wicked problems or even, as I said, post-COVID, looking in terms of the recovery that we'll be going into. Obviously, there's going to be lots of infrastructure money around and building things. So what sort of professions, in particular in Australia, because I know that we'll have a lot of potential school leavers that'll be looking at this and thinking, you know, I'm going to make a decision here, and this is going to have some impact for what I will be doing in the future. Where are those jobs going to be? So I'm wondering, Yuxi, if I could start with you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a question, right? And it's always hard to predict the future, right? We don't really know how everything will happen, especially just after the discussion about uncertainty. I think that's important to mention. I think from my point of view, and sort of we are a tech transfer startup, if you will. I think the increased demand will be on people and you know, jobs that professions that understand that technology and can implement that. On one hand, that is graduates, like, you know, people that have a scientific skill, but also people that might, you know, after finishing school without going to university, have a talent. You know, building a robot involves a team of people, and involves people from all ranges of skills, right? From mechanical engineering, which we usually refer to as the mech heads, all the way to the computer nerds, the computer scientists that actually have the coding, right? So I think for me, from my point of view, I think we need both, and I think the infrastructure is partly tackling one of that. But I think the other aspect is you know, research and academic output, and people that have that academic skill set that can make these more decisions about, like, evaluating the tools that are being built.
Yeah, Megan, I'm wondering if you've got a view on this.
I don't disagree, and I also think, you know, it's not always about the technical aspects, it's also about the functional aspects, and I think that we can't solve problems until we know which problems we're trying to solve. So having, I guess, roles such as business analysts and functional analysts, help to identify those problems that we're trying to solve so that we can automate those processes or we can look at things differently. And I think that it's skills like business analysis and data and analytics are certainly things that we're looking at in the ICT industry and where we're definitely seeing some growth.
Thanks for that, Meg. And Hugh, I guess it's a really exciting time, I think, in Queensland, because I see there's plenty of investment. So where do you think we should be thinking about those professions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I suppose asking that question is a bit like saying what stocks would you buy or what horse would you back. If I knew the answer, then I'd probably go into business and make lots of money, Robert, but I never have. That said, one thing, and I don't mean to panic people too much, but one thing that's true for Queensland and Australia in general is the economy has narrowed. So relative to other OECD advanced economies, we have dropped down. What does that mean? Is we're relying on a smaller number of big industries, and you know what they are? They're coal, beef, tourism, tertiary education. Our manufacturing base is still not what it could be, and I think you can see that coming out in the state and federal government statements at the moment. We really need to that is a very diverse competency. So I think skills around the manufacturing sector, and there's still a diverse set of skills, are going to be what all our governments will be pushing and promoting. So we have another leg, another bigger leg. Obviously, we have amazing manufacturing, but it's not what it used to be. It's often going to be niche manufacturing, specialised manufacturing, biosynthesis, manufacturing of things that, you know, we talked about 3D printing of metal objects, that you spoke about. That sort of stuff is going to be extremely important, because if Australia can't get that fifth or sixth leg up and running, then we are exposed. Our economy becomes extremely fragile.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I do have another question, but I might move to some of the questions that are coming from the audience. So it's great to see that we've actually got a few there. I'll just start with Gail Brent, who's actually just posted an observation, and I think it's a good one to repeat. It says an observation rather than a question. The emphasis on how important transferable skills are across all science industries is such an important point and so vital for long-term employability, career success. Great to see these skills being discussed in such depth. And I think it actually points to that discussion about careers. You can't necessarily predict where you're going to be, but you can certainly have those skills which allow you to pivot into different careers. I don't know if anyone else wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, well, there is this saying that people, well, I have two close relatives who had one job with one employer for their entire life.
Yeah.
And now they predict that the person leaving high school or university now will have 17 jobs. That's an enormous change in 2 generations. One job or 2 jobs or 3 to 17. So, yeah, exactly right.
Absolutely. So here's a question. Do you think there are any areas of education that are lacking in our current institutions for students of science? I see you shaking your head or nodding your head. You must see some like so. What do you think?
I wouldn't say lacking. I think we can improve in certain areas, and I think it was sort of brought up before. Science communication, how to communicate what the technology is doing in more layman's terms, I think is critical, and I think that's something that can be improved. And secondly, I guess from a startup point of view and an industry point of view, I think Australia is really good at doing science. I think there's improvement to do on doing science and tech transfer, and I think that can involve either some of the transferable skills before, as in like how do I even communicate that, but also like how do I evaluate if there is a business value or a value to an industry partner involved. And there's probably different ways of dealing with that, from internships that were mentioned before with co-funded internships, all the way to having not an MBA style class, but projects that have not just a technical and a STEM focus, but also have a focus on what is the, I guess, economic, societal, industry impact of that thing. I think that is something that can be improved. I think that would be highly valuable for science graduates.
Yeah, Megan, and it's not just science. I guess I'm thinking of STEM graduates as overall. But Megan, I'm wondering about the people that you're employing that come directly out of university. What are those areas that you see are lacking for those people when they come into employment?
Look, I know I seem to be the soft skills person today, but it really is though. So the ability to write business cases, the ability to be able to manage a project, and all of those things are gaps that we certainly spend time with our graduates on, helping them hone those skills. The ability to look at budgets, cost, estimate, resources, and all of those types, or estimate project deliveries, or all those types of things. And I think when we all start out, we need to learn those things, but it's definitely a skill that I think that we could spend some more time honing, I guess through work placements and the likes, to make sure that students are exposed to the full realm of what working in industry is like, because we don't get projects unless we've got funding. We don't get work unless we've written a tender document or responded to a tender document. So there's all of those types of things that need to be thought of, and there's certainly where I think that we could add some value in what we're doing. Thanks
very much for that, Meg. And Hugh?
Yeah, and really agreeing with Megan, but to be even more specific, one thing, as undergraduates, we often say, give us a 1,000-word or 2,000-word essay, or write a prac and make sure it's X thousand words, the write-up of that practical. But of course, that means that I still remember writing something and then thinking, how can I get another 500 words? So how can I make it more? It's almost backwards of what I want from my PhD students, and I don't know how we got to this point, because the most powerful and most prestigious and influential scientific publications in the world are in Nature and Science usually, and they are the shortest. So I would love that thing that I still remember doing. What was it called in high school English? Called comprehension, which was you read 10 pages and you turned it into half a page. So succinct, clear, accurate writing, or verbal summary. So any person in STEM who can quickly and accurately communicate verbally or in a written way information is going to go a long way.
Thanks for that, Hugh. It actually reminds me of a famous story of Louis de Broglie, whose particle wave duality, when he wrote his PhD thesis, and for those who know PhDs, they're usually over a time period around 3 years, actually sometimes they go a bit longer. But at the end of his 3 years, he handed in a thesis that was 10 pages long, and the committee considering the PhD were actually going to throw it out and said, no, you can't hand that in. And it actually took the intervention of Einstein to get that accepted, and of course de Broglie won the Nobel Prize for the particle wave duality theory. So it was concise. I'll say that at least. I might move on to another interesting question here, and I might start with you, Hugh, as well. Is it still acceptable for public research funding to support blue sky, interest-driven research just to extend the bounds of human knowledge?
Well, it is acceptable, and it happens, and Australian Research Council Discovery Grants and a lot of those fellowships are in that vein. That said, there has been, I would say, a somewhat of a shift. So those pure research grants, which are the most purest form, I suppose, we still have, they more and more ask, how is this going to be useful? In the day 20 years ago, you just had to say it was interesting and it was novel, and they were looking for something. Just prove to me this is on the cutting edge. Don't prove to me it's useful. So, I have mixed feelings about that. I am a very applied scientist. I think our panel are very applied STEM people across the board. But there has to be a role. The fundamental things, pure mathematics, which is something that I was relatively hopeless at. Superficially, well, it's called pure mathematics. Nothing else has really kept that word. We are definitely not applied in their name. Yet strangely enough, almost all of pure mathematics has ended up being incredibly useful, and some of it, like cryptology, if you could value if you could pay the pure mathematicians who did the number theory that underpinned cryptology, they would have had a salary 100 times bigger than what they got as a pure scientist. So we have to be careful if we go down the applied route too far.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yuxi, what you know, being in industry yourself, seeing that, do you see that that's a good use of taxpayers' money?
I am in industry, and I think there's definitely room for applied science, but I strongly believe that if you want to know what 20 years down the track is applied science, you have to do fundamental science right now. So I'm a strong believer in some blue sky research, and I do believe that's part of what the taxpayer money is for. It's a gamble, right? We don't really know what in 20 years' time is going to be the leading technology, but if we're not investing right now, in 20 years' time, we can't complain that we haven't done it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Megan, do you have a thought around this?
I think it's more, I agree with what both gentlemen have said, and maybe there's a balance in also working with industry in that research to sort of bring it together, so that there's, I guess, outcomes that are driven. And I know in the organisation that I work for, we certainly look to work with researchers around what we can do moving forward, and look to co-seek that funding or co-fund that research as well. So there's certainly opportunity in market for that.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. I'm just conscious of the time, and I know, Megan, that you have to go. You've got a tight deadline. So I'd just like maybe just a couple of minutes if each person could to just respond to this question, and that is, if you're a school leaver now, what would you study and why? Who'd like to start with that one? Megan, you look like you're keen.
I've got this new saying, just work with animals. Look, you know, that's a really good question, and one that I don't really know the answer to. I've never really thought about that. I'm so, I guess, embedded in my career and what I do, and so passionate about it. I've never really thought about an alternative. So maybe swing back to me on that. Give me 5 and see what the other guys have got to say.
Okay, Yuxi.
I'm close to Megan on that one. I think the point is you should do something that excites you, and you should be able to learn about that and learn that more creative thinking and also critical thinking about the problem that you're excited about, because I think that's the thing that's going to transfer. I studied computer science because it was interesting to me, and back then there wasn't really too much talk about AI and robotics going on, but it turned out to be, you know, interesting right now. So I think the point is try out a few things and try out what you like, because for me, one of the critical things that I learned in my quite a few years of academic studies is there's a lot of things that you don't know if you like or not if you don't try it. And I studied space science. I studied 2 semesters of astronomy, 2 semesters of rocket propulsion. I studied 2 semesters of political science, just because it was something for me to explore whether that is of interest to me. And I ended up doing something that does not involve space science or political science, but I think it is something that helped me explore who I am and what is really exciting for me to do as a job.
I think that's very good advice. Things that will really make you interested and skill sets that you can use elsewhere. Megan, would you want to go back? Yeah.
Yeah, I still haven't come, I'm still sticking to my original answer, but it reminds me of when I was younger also. And at one point I was telling this story on the session on Monday. I thought I wanted to be a real estate agent, but here I am. So, it's okay to swap and change, and it's okay to evolve. And like I said, I wouldn't change my career at all for the world at the moment, but I agree with Yuxi. Explore. You've got all the time in the world, and as Hugh also mentioned, you're likely to have potentially 17 jobs. So what you know now and what you do now will change and evolve over time.
Thanks very much for that, Megan. And you?
Yeah, I sort of had a very short answer and a longer answer. Again, I agree entirely. You know, if you're not doing something that you like, then you're not going to wake out in the morning and get out of bed. So that's essential. The one very short answer is, you know, I really wish I knew something about soil science. If there was no soil, we would not be having this conversation. There would be no vegetation, there would be no animals. I have no idea how the soil works. I just know it is so important. And where are all the soil scientists? There are far too few of them, and increasingly, particularly in Australia, with fairly relatively infertile soils that are disappearing into the ocean at a great rate, knowing how to solve that problem. And I feel as though I would even understand Australia much better if I just understood how soil works. So that's my retirement project, is to enrol in some soil science subjects. The other thing I think Yuxi and Megan both covered this a little bit is, you know, some of the things that you initially find a little bit annoying. So my mother said, basically listen to your mother. My mother said, do more maths, Hugh. So I went to university wanting to, you know, Megan said something about animals. I loved animals. I just wanted to spend the rest of my life bird watching. Strangely enough, there aren't many careers in bird watching, and if those that there are not particularly well paid. So she said, do more maths, and I ended up, it took me a long time. I genuinely hated it. I didn't hate it, I just found it really, really dull because I didn't know what it was for. It wasn't until second year maths when we had a professor who taught us how traffic lights are controlled and optimised. And then we had a professor who talked to us about the hawk-dove game in game theory and the prisoner's dilemma. And then I thought, oh, this stuff I've been doing for 14 years, this is actually useful and it's interesting, and I'm getting unanticipated results that are counterintuitive that I would never have expected if I just sat there and tried to work these things out, and game theory and optimization theory. And then I was suddenly hooked. So yeah, that's 14 years of waiting for something to be interesting, and I've loved maths ever since. So don't give up. Do some of the things that are a little bit more harder and sometimes seem a little bit more esoteric, because almost everything, to be honest, is useful eventually.
That's fantastic advice, everyone, for finishing up this this conversation. I've so much enjoyed having this panel discussion today. So thank you very much, Hugh, Yuxi and Megan, for joining us today and providing your sage advice. I'm sure that there'll be many people in our audience that will really benefit from our chat today. I also want to thank the Partnerships Office again for hosting this panel discussion today, and I will put a plug in there that particularly around that this office does a lot of work for integrated learning and preparing people for the workforce, and those soft, I won't call them soft skills. I think transferable skills is probably a better terminology for me, in the sense that these are the skills that you can pivot from in many different jobs, and I think that's really important that people graduate with an armament of those particular skills. So I thank people in the Partnership Office there, Damien Harris and Shannon Early for their organisation for today and getting us all organised. And of course, all our attendees, I thank you very much for coming along today, and we'll see you next time for one of the Griffith Sciences Impact events. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.